Hello and welcome, it's Chris from Christopher Holt Training. Welcome to this tutorial where we're going to talk about fundamentals of core training. We're going to start by talking a little bit about the body because in a sense that is the building blocks that we need to be able to understand core exercise. So we'll get stuck into that. So before we get into that, just quickly mention my social media. Whatever platform you're watching this on, please do comment below, stick a question below, some feedback below. Whatever, it's all good. More than happy to reply to anything down there. Alternatively, if you're not on one of YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, please do come along to any of those. Just type in Christopher Holt Training and you'll be able to find me. So please do again like and follow on those. Alternatively, if you want to find out more about this information, you can go to the link in the bottom of the description and you can download my How to Build Core Strength and Stability ebook, which contains this information and then expands on it. So we talk about things like the muscles of the core, how they work, then we start moving into the exercises that you want to start doing, how to perform them correctly. Then we talk you through some exercises to avoid. We don't want to do them because they're not based on the information. So we talk you through those, talk you a little bit about core training for rehabilitation, core training for fitness, things like that. And then at the end, just a little sort of workout guide to how you can put it all together in a little workout and sort of, in a sense, put that information into practice. It's not just a sort of a read-through ebook, it's more of a practical guide, which is educational. So if you want that, please do go along, click, download that, it'd be great. So the fundamentals of core training. So two fundamentals which sort of build from and you build into core training. So number one is the spine is built, or the torso is built to prevent movement. So that's the spine and the muscles of the torso. Then you've got the joints, the muscles and the limbs. They are designed to produce movement. So when I'm talking about core training, I sort of divide it into two categories of exercises. So you've got static core exercises and dynamic core exercises. Obviously, static core exercises have their place, plank, side plank, bridge, so on and so forth. And then you've got the more dynamic core exercises, which in some respects kind of goes out into all other exercises, as long as it's like a free weight type movement based exercise. So wood chops, reverse chops, deadlifts, walking lunges, kettlebell swings, all of that kind of stuff. As long as they're performed correctly, they can be described as core exercises. The problem that we find is you see people saying these exercises build core strength, they don't teach you how to do them correctly, and then they just turn into an injury causing exercise, which could be your back, it could be your shoulder, it could be your knee, it could be sort of somewhere in the body. But that's not for this tutorial. So the two fundamentals is the torso is designed to prevent movement, which I'm going to expand on in a second, and the limbs are designed to produce the movement. So what does it mean when I say the torso is designed to prevent movement? Well, if we look at the muscles and how they're designed, you've got the rectus abdominis, which fibers sort of go in up and down direction. You've got the obliques, which go in sort of a diagonal across direction. You've then got erector spinae, which again go up and down. You've got transverse abdominis, which goes all the way around. You've got lats, which sort of come down in the opposite direction to the obliques. So what I'm basically trying to say is, if you can imagine, you've got all these different layers of fibers that go in different directions. What that's trying to create is a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. So it's very different to, let's just say, doing a sit-up or a crunch, where you're just trying to focus on the muscle fibers of the rectus abdominis by going up and down. So what this allows us to do is move into a more movement-based exercise where we're using more of the core. So if we take the wood chop, for example, or the reverse chop, which you basically start with the cable D grip down the bottom, and then you sort of come through, and then you come up to the top like so. Now what is basically happening there is, as you move the weight, the tension in the torso is moving with it. So you are using much more of the core as you work through. And it's the same if you were to do a clean and press, which is where you lift it off the floor, come up into this position, around, catch the bar at the top. as you move the bar, the tension and the stress on the torso is moving as the bar moves as well. So it's much more dynamic, and that is how the core works. So if that's how the core works, based on how it's designed, because what that's trying to do is that's trying to prevent movement of the torso. So as you drive with the legs, because if you ask any boxer, any golfer, where do they get their power from? They get it from the hips. But they express their power, if it's a boxer, through his fist, or if it's a golfer, it's through the club. So they generate the power here in the hips, they express the power either through the hands or through the club. So they've got to transfer the power from the hips up through the core, down through the arm, and out through the club. And how you do that is by maintaining a stiffened minimal movement from the torso. Now the golf swing, the torso and the spine does move because it rotates. But what you get from that is you then get pulses. So as you initiate the golf swing, that part, everything tightens. It relaxes as it goes through the air, and then as you hit again, it tightens. That's the same with the boxer. They generate the power back here. As they move the hip, stiffens, then relaxes. As they make contact, it stiffens again. So when they're generating the power, it goes stiff, and it prevents movement of the torso. Now what that does, that allows the power to transfer through the torso, down the arm, and out the club. If they were doing that and the torso moved at those moments, what you then get is an energy leak. So the power generated there, so let's just say they generate 100 units of power from their hips. If they've got a movement, let's just say there's a 20% energy leak out of that movement. So they generate 100 units of power, but they only express 80 of it. So by training the core correctly, by working the whole greater than sum of its parts, you learn or you train that stiffness. So this is why I then say use static and dynamic exercises, because you can train that, first of all, stiffness and then pulse. Because with the static exercises, you learn to abdominal brace with the shoulders, so you get the latissimus dorsi, the traps. With the abdominal brace, you get the rectus abdominis, you get the obliques. So they all contract. You can also then involve glute medius, glute minimus, glute max, so on and so forth. So you learn to contract and sort of brace all of that area. When you then bring in the dynamic exercises, so you've built that in your brain, because essentially all of this is learned in here. It's all sort of done, and this is how it plays out as well. So the better we can learn it, the better we can play it out. The more consciously we can learn it, and in some respects perfect it, the better it comes out in a more natural way. So we need to be able to stiffen the torso, pulse the torso, so we can stiffen it using planks, side planks, bridges, and more static exercise like Pallof presses as well. And then we can move into a more dynamic with wood chops, reverse wood chops, kettlebell swings, atlas swings with kettlebells, deadlifts, so on and so forth, clean presses, snatches, all that kind of stuff. So we've got to go from that static, because we're stationary, it's much easier to learn. You can concentrate more on what's happening within your body if you're still. You just got to focus on these muscles here, breathing here, bracing, and all. That's all you need to do. As you start then bringing in movement, you've then got to think, well, what are my legs doing? What's my torso doing? What are my arms doing? So you've got a lot more to think about. So you build static and then you go into dynamic, because it allows your brain to learn the movements. And then what you can do is you can then break the movements down, so you can just move the hips, just move the arms, so you can learn those sort of different movements as you go through. And then you can bring it all together in the one big movement. So essentially you're sort of compartmentalizing the movement into its sort of single parts, but then you've got to bring it together and knit it all back together again. So when we talk about the spine prevents movement, that's what we're talking about. And then when we talk about the limbs producing the movement, that's what we're trying to talk about, is generate the movement from the hips. The reason we say it that way is the spine is a slightly movable joint. So now this is the anatomy essentially of it. And in some respects, how I came to the conclusion and how I understood how to put these exercises together. So the spine is a slightly movable joint. It's made up of, like, let's just say many joints that move slightly. But when you get many joints moving slightly, it can, in some respects, create one large movement. Now, so that is a slightly movable joint. If we then go out to the hips, we've then got freely movable joints. You've got a ball and socket joint, which has a huge range of movement. So you've got the spine, which in its segment is lots of little movements, but then you've got one big joint. So you've also then got the glute max around it. Now, those are big power generating muscles. You've got lats around the shoulders, again, big power generating muscles. Pecs around the shoulders, big power generating muscles. So the hips and the shoulders are freely movable joints with large ranges of movement, big powerful movements around it. So it makes sense to generate the movement from there. If we then go to the spine, where we've got all these little movements, we've also got muscles that are crisscrossing, which in a sense is acting like carbon fibre, which is a very strong substance, but sort of it has its flexibility to it, and it's able to manage load very well. So that is in a sense what the core's doing. So when we generate a lot of power from the glutes or from the lats or from the pecs or wherever we're producing it, shoulders or hips, the torso is then designed to lock down and then transfer the power out into the club, up through the hip, through the torso, so on and so forth, as I've mentioned. So from an anatomy biomechanic perspective, that's how our, in a sense, core is designed. So it's just taking those principles and then moving it out into exercise and movement. So when we talk about back extensions, sit-ups, crunches, side bends, twists, in some respects they're not that useful exercises because they don't match those two fundamental principles. What they are, in a sense, doing is they are creating movement of the torso, which goes against preventing movement of the torso, because you're using, again, much, let's just say, weaker muscles than a big glute max, for example, to generate power. Obviously, if the spine moves as well, that leaves it more prone and at risk to injury as well. So again, there's another reason, in some respects, not to move the spine under load when we're moving heavy weights. Now again, if we go back to the golf swing, the spine is moving, but there are pulses to it. And when it relaxes is when it's swinging through the air, is when there's least stress on the spine. It's when we're generating the power is when the stress goes on the spine. So in some respects, those are sort of the two fundamental principles of core training. So you can use those in fitness and in rehabilitation to be able to get the body, in some respects, back to sort of an optimized state. So as I mentioned, those are the two fundamental principles of core training. You can start applying them. Again, as I mentioned, go to the ebook. It sort of explains it a little bit more, gives you some exercises to start working on, and then gives you sort of different groups of exercises to start thinking about and sort of moving towards going from that static into that dynamic. So if you want to build your core strength and stability, you're going to be in a much better place if you use these static and dynamic core exercises in the ebook than if you're using sit-ups, crunches, back extensions, side bends, Russian twists and things like that. So hopefully that's been helpful for you. Hopefully it's given you a better idea of core training and some things that you can do. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris Pole Training. I'll speak to you in the next tutorial.